Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Larry Moore, publisher of Broadstone Books, and I'm very pleased and excited to welcome you here. We've got an outstanding turnout today, over 30 people, 37 participants today. Great to have so many poetry lovers with us in the room. Today, for our March Zoom event, we're welcoming 3 poets who all have new books out from Broadstone. And while they all have their own very distinctive voices and styles, the thing that they share in common, at least one thing at least they share in common, is a strong attachment to place in their work. For Allison Thorpe, that place is rural Metcalfe County, Kentucky, where she and her late husband, the reckless Pilgrims of her title, homesteaded for many years, and a place and time that she looks back on in her poetic memoir. For Samantha DeFlitch, in her debut collection, many of her poems are set in the Pennsylvania countryside outside of Pittsburgh, a place of literal confluence, where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers come together to form the Ohio, but also of metaphorical confluence of all the people and places and things that have come together to compose her life. For William Reichard, place is the upper prairie of his native Minnesota. And while he writes with great affection for the landscape and small towns of his youth, this is also a haunted place, a place where the delicate barricades between life and death are permeable, peopled with literal ghosts, with memories of lost loved ones, and also the living ghosts, those on the periphery of society, especially, as he calls them at one point, the country queers. I'll be back after the first round of readings to talk with these poets about the role of place in their work. But meanwhile, sit back and let's enjoy a stimulating afternoon of poetry. We're going to kick it off with Allison Thorpe. Unmute yourself and step into the room.
Okay, stepping. Hello, welcome everybody. And it's good to see the faces that are there, even some people from Metcalfe County. So glad to see you as well. Thank you, Larry and Sheila and Stephanie at Broadstone for hosting this reading. And I want to say hello to Sam and Bill, and I look forward to hearing you read as well. This is my book, Reckless Pilgrims. So many people in Kentucky and Appalachia can trace their families through generation after generation after generation. But I come from a family of vagabonds. We're pilgrims seeking something, I'm not sure what, country to country, state to state. My husband and I, as Larry said, moved to Kentucky in the mid-1970s. Mother Earth News persuaded us. They said an acre of land and independence was all you needed. You too can be self-sufficient. So we looked through several states, found Kentucky, and just loved it. We bought a wooded tract of land that we cleared ourselves. We built our own home of quarry stone and wood. One of the things that we really liked about Kentucky were the stories. Every piece of land that we looked at had a story attached. It had a history or a legend that we thought was just fascinating. Even directions that people would give us contained stories. There were no roads or streets. It was turn left at the field where the barn burned down 10 years ago, or drive up Turtle Mud Creek, or, turn left at the field where so-and-so got kicked by his mule last winter. So the first poem I'm going to read contains some of the stories of a place that we looked at. Stone Ruins, Slater's Field. Reckless pilgrims, we came to the land, bearing our hunger like a bony heart, our ragged dreams an open sea. We thought the stone ruins just local color, the country realtor wove into our purchase. History altered to myth for the selling. A rock foundation of a house burned down generations ago, and 50 paces out, a graveyard. We tentatively surveyed the ridges and valleys, uncovering only stinging nettles and beggar's lice. Boundaries had shifted with seasons, weeds bulldozing fence and flower, the land's slow ache of redressing. We wallowed in the stories, two old women alone, luring a preacher to their bed, burying bricks of gold, witching water from dry wells during a strawberry moon. That the women kept us still near Gooselet Creek, hulled corn and sacks of sugar at daybreak, stashed bottles in a tree stump, a ditch, a shallow cave. The base of the house, when we found it, proved a poor, crumbling limestone enclosure, wild only in honeysuckle and mayapple rumor. The remains of a charred and jagged chimney jutted skyward. The wind spilled no voices to the hush, no flow of cosmic connection, surely no answer to legend. Past the hill, I stumbled over the first headstone, and then we saw the rest. A crooked fairyland circle under the cool umbrella of maple. Lichened graffiti, gray stone crops, like loose, roughened teeth of some giant lain to rest. Myrtle soothed the soil like prayer. In that cathedral of uncertain shadow, we spoke in hushed tones of clearing the old house site, weaving fresh flowers among the graves. But a sudden breeze bristled the blossoms. Ropey grapevine gnarled a jealous embrace, and something unseen settled us to silence, something not quite like benediction. Lately, I've seen a bunch of pictures on Facebook of people with their flowers coming through snow, flowers outside. So I thought this poem might be appropriate. Crocus in Snow. We nub our lure to light, earthly womb behind our waking. Quilted layers shrug the herald of an icy floor. Beautiful, we rise, open our purple robes to flash the world, shameless in our season. This poem is called Deviations. Caught off guard, with October still styling the calendar. Papers to be written hover like buzzards, black, hungry. Leaves and letters scatter, resistant to frantic rake. Scrambling blindly, as light fails, I turn. One-eyed candles wink, Vivaldi's sail shadow. You have laid the hearth. My fire, leaping from brain to branch, ignites. And for the last one in this segment, my sister was living in England when we were building our house. And she came back to the States. We had been out of touch for many years. She came back to the States, didn't know we were living in the wilds of Kentucky, decided to join us. So for weeks, we put her to work, hard labor, hauling rocks and shoveling sand and gravel into a cement mixer. And after about 3 weeks, she said, enough of this, point me to the nearest big city, which we did. So we became the country mouse and the city mouse. This is one visit I had with her, Commonwealth, after Wendell Berry's The Peace of Wild Things. My sister is killing dandelions. Actually, she hugs the checkbook while we busily loiter her front picture window and watch a uniformed man spray the yellow blooms. I want to turn away but can't, as one does at an accident or when a funeral passes. She glows. Once again, her lawn will echo that of neighbor and the perfect stretch beyond. Later, I toast them at dinner to the dandelions. I've savored the greens in spring, rubbed their buttery softness on my laughing daughter's nose, enjoyed the wine with friends, whispered their soft spore to wind. My sister raises her glass. Good riddance. When I leave the next morning, a few straggled smears of brown weakly nod a farewell. The crisp air clinches a whiff of poison I try not to breathe as I pass. That evening, nuzzled on porch swing, I inhaled the glazed and rosy musk of homecoming. My neighbors, oak and hickory, creak and sigh and welcome him. Cardinals pleasure the dimming air. Deer snort faintly down the hill. The last folds of sun highlight dandelions that pepper the view. Join wild onion and wood violet, switchgrass and beach fern. In this harmony of voice, this wonder of difference that is our place in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. And now we will turn to Sam DeFlitch. Sam, step in and unmute.
Stepping on in. Thanks so much, Larry. And I'm going to go ahead and pin myself. There we go. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm seeing some lovely friends and family in the chat, so it's very nice to see everybody. I do want to send a big shout out to Larry. This is my debut collection, and I've learned that having a book and publishing a book is much different than writing a book. So Larry's been very gracious and helpful as I moved through the publishing process. So thank you so much, Larry. I also want to give a shout out to Connie DeFlitch, who's here. She's both my mom and my cover artist. So I'm just gonna flash Confluence up here. She created this watercolor, which is called Three Rivers, specifically for the book. She's an artist working in New Hampshire, so it was great to be able to collaborate with her on this. And I'm very happy to be here at this reading today. So Pittsburgh is, to me, a real liminal place. And I'm certainly nothing if not obsessed with places where the divine and otherworldly sort of bump up against. One second. I've also got a corgi and they're quite mouthy. The gritty realness of this world. And I think that shows up a lot in the book. I once read an essay with Carolyn Forche, and she said that the world is at once fallen and holy both at the same time. And I think that Pittsburgh is a really wonderful place to explore that idea. I think the poems ask what it means that, you know, a turnpike toll taker is the place where sort of lines blur, and that potholes and gas stations and these really ordinary places can be places where extraordinary transformation can happen. Gerald Stern, I was recently reading an essay of his, and he wrote that Pittsburgh, because of its very physical structure, lends itself to the mythical in a way that, say, Philadelphia or Cincinnati does not. Pittsburgh is the mother. Because of its rivers, hills, and valleys, ethnic groups were isolated from each other, and the European cultural habits, even accents, remained. Yet because of the hills, there always remained open spaces that could not be built upon, and this made the place something of a mystery. And I think that's a really lovely introduction to the poems of the book. So I want to start out with one of my favorite poems at the start of the book, which is called Garbage Night. And I think it really sets a sort of theme for the book, that we're sort of products of almost sometimes really surprising things that come before, during, and after us. And that time pushes itself around us in strange ways. So Garbage Night. It is Thursday night. It is garbage night. The trash is my old clothes, and my old clothes are slipping through my hands. My hands are a box full of flies. The flies are taking off with my hair. Look, I am bald. I am my mother's truck engine. I am the space the deer left sleeping in the ferns. I am 7:52 in the evening. See, the sun has already set, and the dog is crying to go out. Am I her too, her nose raised, twitching into the evening air? My parents are getting old. I don't like to say that out loud, but it's true. The dog is old too. I am rubbing the dog's legs. I am a car full of empty coffee cups. See, I can't bring myself to dump them. They remind me of yesterday. I am all the days that the sky has broken clear and cold, spilling oranges across the dawn line. I am the Ohio line. I am West Side Road after all the tourists have left for the day. I am laying myself down on the asphalt to watch the stars come out in real soaring spires above my head until the dog begins her howling. I am waking all the days. I am the ferns, and I keep space for you, for the coffee cups. I am peeling my long body off asphalt and gone round back to feed the chickens. So the next poem, it's a real Pittsburgh poem, real gut punch of a Pittsburgh poem. It's called Crossing the Hot Metal Street Bridge. And I love that it lets itself play with movement, both physical movement over place and also through time. And I think it explores the idea that places spring from people, spring from places, almost like nesting dolls sort of opening themselves. And I really feel this in this poem. So Crossing the Hot Metal Street Bridge. It was late January and I was crossing Forbes at 5th. There was an old woman sitting in a folding chair. She was shouting that the miracle would take place in a studio apartment in Saugerties. It was too cold for anyone to be making prophecy that day, or any day in January really, but there she was, a small wonder. I could hear her on the Hot Metal Street Bridge with all its spires, messy, knotted, soaring upward into the gray-lit skyline, and all at once, I forgot where I was. The old woman was my grandmother or me if I lingered on the bridge too long. Everything was a very wide dream, the lights from the windows of the skyscrapers expanding outward, pushing each other into stars. This was real. As the city grew wide, I crouched beneath the towering post to touch the rusted steel. Big Ben was dying. On the south side, Mike taped Friday's Trib over cracked panes of glass at his bar, but still the old woman's voice seeping under the windowsill. My mother was frying pierogies. She stepped away from the cast iron skillet to gaze out the window where snowpack cleaved to tracks, and my father carried an old lab in his arms, the wind sharp on her nose that raised, twitching into evening air. So the next poem I'm going to read is from the second section of the book. The book is actually divided into 3 sections, each named for one of the rivers in Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh is formed by 2 rivers, the Monongahela and the Allegheny, that sort of merge together at the point where they form the Ohio River. And thus the 3 section names of the book. So this is from section 2 called Allegheny. The poem is called Old Man Dreaming, and like Hot Metal Street Bridge, it's really interested in the relationship between structures and people. If you've ever been to Pittsburgh or seen like a picture of Pittsburgh, you'll know that the landscape of the city itself is really striking, the bridges that span over waters and connect these big stretches of land. And I think this poem likes that quite a bit. Old Man Dreaming. I watch a man grow old, and it is my father. Old man on 2 legs, old man dreaming. Look, old man, where is the warm weather you promised me when I was very young? Everything I see is snowdrifts and plows, and the Monongahela is still frozen over, the coal barges stuck fast in the ice. I watch everything around me hold its breath, very still in the winter, as the buildings hover over bridges whose spires twang in the cold. And then the final poem I'll read for this section is a poem that is emphatically not Pittsburgh, but still ends up taking place on a river. So I suppose that is quite a through line of the book. It's more of a New Hampshire poem, but to me it feels like a really quiet breath of a poem sandwiched between 2 poems about cars. So it's this kind of really interesting placement of the poem. My mother's handwriting. The dragonfly lands in the space between my fingers and the pause of the river. Lonely paddle on the Androscoggin, I breathe early evening and flush of alpenglow. North, the whisper to follow, a voice, an echoing reverberation, the call of some psalmist. Pines cast themselves over still waters, and a loon calls soft and low and sad. She is like the sudden handwriting of my mother, like the bent page of my brother's journal. In the lingering echoes across the water, I can hear the tail end of north stretching 100 miles, skimming the unbroken surface of the water like the hawk gliding before a dive. A gentle shake of my palm and the dragonfly turns south, and I paddle on, beneath the pines that sweep softly their arms, a call for me. Behind, there is a fox on a small island in the middle of the river, waiting patiently for the first glimpse of the waning moon. So that's what I have. So thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam, for reading those. And I love your observation about liminal space, because that provides the perfect segue for our third reader today, Bill Reichard. So you're up.
Okay.
There's the man.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read work from my new book, which is so new I don't have it yet, so I can't hold it up for you. But I think you all had the photos up earlier of the books. It's called Our Delicate Barricades Downed, and I'll just read a few pieces here. These are prose poems. On Facebook, there was a poetry group lately that they've been having this discussion, and last night someone posted and said, what are prose poems? And today there are about 100 answers, and everyone's weighing in. And I finally weighed in and just said, I'm not sure we have to define everything. Maybe it's okay for some things to be less than defined, or to sort of operate as some sort of space outside of a label. So that's the excuse I'll give for not having a good definition of prose poetry. And just thank Larry and everyone at Broadstone. This is the second book I've done with you all, and it's been such a good experience. So it's called The Question of the Body. The soil there was primarily clay, sticky, slick. Harvesting carrots, radishes, beets, washing the clinging dirt away with icy well water. And the water full of iron, so strong a single glass left the taste of metal in my mouth. Yet it didn't steel me against that hard life. The air there was filled with conflicting scents, fresh mown alfalfa against the stench of the stockyard next door, peony and piss, lilac and tractor exhaust. My blood was iron. My blood was smoke from the endless stream of cigarettes my family consumed, cut me, and a wisp of burnt tobacco drifted from the wound. My bones were trees, oak, silver maple, ash, box elder. My hair, the weightless fluff from the cottonwood seeds. My body, the flat land, the subtle hills that rolled from acre to acre. Frigid river water, the unseen undercurrent, the brackish pools near the shore. My nerves spreading out in endless tributaries. What held me together? Gravel roads and hot tar, snowdrifts and icicles, sheer will, dreams, confusion. Next one is called Night. It was dark on the country roads and the moon was slight, a small crescent in the sky. The stars were white clusters shining backward through time, mere ghosts of light. When I drove over the wooden bridge that spanned the river where I learned to swim, I stopped, shut off the engine, and sat. I felt the weight of summer air, not heavy exactly, but fair, an almost liquid mix, thick, like I could grab handfuls of it and hurl it in slow motion across space. I heard crickets and the water's constant chatter. I heard the crisp, brittle footfalls of animals in the nearby forest, the wind in summer leaves. This was the way my whole childhood had been. Ears not yet closed to the way the unseen world spoke, finally, out loud in the darkness. Next one is called The First Man. Some of these are kind of portrait poems of a variety of people in the area I grew up in. First Man. He'd been the mayor for 30 years, town veterinarian, mentor of fatherless boys. He took them along on house calls to isolated farms to treat sick cattle or injured dogs, or drove them to town to buy their first suits for prom or graduation. After the sheriff found him dead, the top of his head opened up to the sky, shotgun still in his hands. Each secret he thought he'd kept began to speak. How many had there been? whose sons were so ashamed of what they'd done, what he'd done to them, they could never speak it, had buried it so deep it finally spilled out in closed fists, stolen prescriptions. A good town knows how to silence its own. The residents willed themselves to forget. Still, he named each street and the new subdivision after his children. This was called We Lutherans. I grew up in the Wisconsin Synod of the Lutheran Church, which, if any of you are familiar, I don't want to insult you, but it's very strict. They wouldn't let us join the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, for instance. They had their own version because it kept your allegiance to God. Anyway, We Lutherans. Polished deep into the pale blonde pews, polished deep into the plain wooden cross on the altar of austerity, in the sanctuary of silence where only the pastor ever spoke in words above a whisper. Every breath, cough, sneeze, or rustle of tissue-thin hymnal pages was heard and commented on later by the ladies who served lunch in the basement after service. Such plainness in the architecture, as if God would grow angry at any hint of the ostentatious. We couldn't find God in a house too holy for anyone not born in or related to anyone else in the area. We lost our faith listening to the whispered laughter of our neighbors who found humor in the holes of the soles of someone's shoes made visible when she knelt to take communion. Between the modulating notes of the tone-deaf soprano and the stern sermons against desire, there was no space to breathe. Between moderation in every action and modestly, implicitly demanded, there was no life. In the brown pews and the unadored altar, in the invisible Christ on the pure blonde cross, I grew distrustful. Life in our town seemed to be lived in the darker corners, away from the light, from the pebble glass windows, in the looks the neighbors gave because our family's anonymous donation envelope didn't sound heavy enough when our mother dropped it into the charter silver collection bowl each Sunday. We have time for one or two more. Let's see. Here's one of the ghosts, Long Gravel Drive. There was nothing special about that place. Local teenagers on drunken weekend nights used to dare each other to travel down the lonely gravel drive, pull up to the long abandoned house and go inside. Something inhabited that house. Call it a ghost or call it a memory, an event so vivid it was etched into the lath and plaster walls. In the presence of a living soul, the thing played itself out like a record with a scratch. So every time the music started, it would play up to one exact moment, then jump back to the beginning again. Over and over, a dark form, an arm raised, a scream, a hammer blow. The whole family dead and the murderer never found. If you went in, you didn't stay long. And after you ran out, nearly paralyzed by fear, you lied to your friends, told them it was nothing, called them chicken shits when they wouldn't take their turn inside. And actually, I think I'll stop there. It's about 8 minutes. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to you, Larry.
All right. Very fine. Thanks to all of the readers so far. And what I'm going to ask now, let me change my view here. I'm going to ask everyone else stay muted, please, but I'm going to ask all three of our readers, Bill, Sam, and Allison. You can turn your mics on because I'm hoping we can have a little conversation among ourselves about the role of place in your work. And it's very clear. I think everyone in the room can appreciate now why I chose that as the connective tissue for the three of you reading today, that it's just so powerful. Your work takes us to all of those places. So what strikes me about poetry of place, and particularly in the work that I'm reading and hearing with you, is how place locates us. I mean, it's the place that we are from, or in the case of Allison, a place that we choose, a place that we go to. But I'm also struck in your work by how poetry, well, how place can dislocate us, how there is a tension of belonging and not belonging. And that's perhaps most immediately clear, Bill, in your work, where there is that tension, where you're writing so much about the outsiders. And some of those stories, I'm thinking about that first citizen who's, we talk about when the top of his head comes off, all the secrets start to leak out. And to some extent, your book is about those secrets leaking out. Allison, with your work, I think about the fact that you came to a place, and you alluded to this in your opening remarks, that you don't have those deep roots there. So to some extent, you were always an outsider, even after being there for a long time. And I guess, Sam, you speak to this so much too. I feel that sense about when you're out traveling the back roads and all, and it almost feels like you're going into another world. Who wants to kind of step in and kind of speak about that tension of place, how place both roots you, but may also leave you feeling rootless, and how you've explored that in your work? Someone be brave.
I will. And you're right. You do feel like an outlander, an outsider. We lived in Metcalfe County almost 40 years, which was a good part of my life. And you start to think, oh, I'm a Kentuckian, I'm a Metcalfe County person. And then somebody will come along and they'll go, now you ain't from around here, are you? Mm-hmm. And it's just, you don't have the drawl, your tongue does not form the words that they do. So you're always reminded of that you aren't from there, even though you feel like your roots are going down deep and this is your place. There is that tension, definitely.
Mm-hmm. I think, I can pop in. Yeah, I think for me, a dear friend of mine, after reading the book, noted that there was a feeling of wholeness that existed very close alongside a feeling of fragmentation and estrangement. And for me, yes. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh and, Western Pennsylvania. And I left and I went to Virginia and DC and New Hampshire. And I don't think I had realized what roots I really did have in Western Pennsylvania. And I didn't really recognize it as a place with a capital P in my life until I left it, really, and was able to examine it from a distance. So I think in my poems, there's this tension between you don't know what you got till it's gone versus you can't go home again. And I think that is sort of the central tension to these really love poems to a place that I almost feel like is not my place anymore, that I might have lost with a move. So I think that's for me the through line of place here.
Yeah, I think for me, it is that outsiderness maybe, and it's not real anymore as much as it was when I was much younger, when I was a little kid, for instance, or a teenager growing up in that town. It was a town of about 1,500 people, and we actually lived in a village 3 miles away, which was about 70 people, and our family comprised 12 of them. So very small, and everybody knew everybody. And even though my family had been there again for decades, I think we were always outsiders, because originally my family, they came from Nebraska. I was born and raised there, as my older brother was, but the rest of the family came from Nebraska and Colorado. And people took great delight in reminding us of that. I don't know why exactly. I don't think we were trying to take more space than we needed, and maybe we were just big and we needed lots of space. But I think the idea of going home again is really, and the inability to do that has developed over time. My mom passed away last fall, and I sort of, as we packed up the house and left for the last time, I got the last of the things out of the house in January, I sort of realized I would never be going back again. Mm-hmm. Maybe not really ever, maybe certainly not emotionally ever, because there was nothing to tie me there anymore. The tether was broken. And I think that's okay. I think it's all right. I think it's okay if there's a little bit of insecurity based around where exactly we belong. It kind of keeps us on our toes a little bit, makes us maybe reassess in an ongoing way where we do belong or where we want to be, and why we consciously make the choices to stay or to leave. So, yeah.
Very good. Again, Bill, starting from your work particularly, but it certainly applies to all the work here. I keep talking about your book being a haunted and haunting book. And we talked about this from the very beginning when we were working on your manuscript, that we started out by saying it was ghost stories. And then my partner, Sheila, who's in the room, pointed out that it's also ghost stories, the story of those ghosts. And yes, there are the literal ghosts that pop into your book. But I was really struck by how you give voice to all of the outsiders, the transgressives, the others, and you've just described coming from a very small community where to be other in such a small community, you do feel that you don't belong there. Thinking of Allison, I'm glad you read that first poem in your book, that you moved to Kentucky and you find that you're literally living on the graves of the other people who've been there before. So your work is haunted in that sense, but and I don't think you've read any of these poems yet, but there are also some poems in your book, Allison, where you talk about how your late husband, a Vietnam vet, that you get the definite sense of how he was haunted from that experience. So I get that sense of haunting between your two books very much. What's your thought about that, to the degree to which that haunting was part of your experience?
Well, definitely was part of our experience. And buying land, especially country land, often you would get the graveyard of the family that sold that land, and it would be a little section that you couldn't do anything to because it still basically belonged to that family. So you had those, but I always felt like the land, there was so much land that if there were spirits roaming around, they had plenty of room to do it. They wouldn't be haunting our house. But I also have the haunting of sounds. When we moved from Dallas, Texas to Kentucky, and it was so quiet that every little sound that we heard, I mean, I didn't sleep for about a year. I kept my husband awake. Every animal, every insect, every bird makes a strange sound, especially at twilight or just when it's starting to get dark. And what's that? Was that a bear? Was that a rattlesnake? I mean, it was haunting in that sound sense. Even an owl sounded unearthly, in the silence. But yeah, there is always a haunted feeling to the country, I feel like.
And that's a very good way for me to then turn to Sam, talking about that, because it's interesting. In some of the poems you were reading, Sam, you were kind of reading some of the city poems but in your book, I think a lot of the poems that I connected the most with are the ones where you are out on the back roads. And to me, the sense of haunting that I get in your work is how to move into the country is to move back in time, to move into a different timescape, that the pace of life is different. And I don't know if that resonates with you, but I'm thinking a particularly haunting line for you is where you have the encounter with, I think it's a service station attendant who, when asked where you're from and you say Pittsburgh, says no one lives, no one's from Pittsburgh. And the sense that you are from a place that isn't a place, that these places have a kind of mythical sense to them. So.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that another tension I do feel in the book is the tension between my personal Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, and then sort of this mythical idea of Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, which I do feel like it's sort of created by and the people who live there. I hear quite frequently from people who visit Pittsburgh who aren't from it that the downtown area feels almost desolate. There's no one who actually lives in downtown Pittsburgh. It's in the neighborhoods surrounding it. So it's a conversation I have quite frequently. So I was very glad to give it to the gas station attendant. I think for me, a large part of my experience, especially in later years with Pennsylvania, was on the turnpike and on the roads and driving through the countryside. I was constantly driving back and forth from wherever I was living at the time back to Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania to visit family. So maybe even more time was spent on the roads themselves than actually in a physical location. So I think I was really interested in this idea of being really transitory actually through a place and maybe feeling like that place is not a landing zone anymore, for a lack of a better term. So I think that's, there's repetition of gas stations and turnpikes and toll takers and driving late at night all throughout the book. So I think that pops up for a reason. Even the repetition of an image like a folding chair that pops up a lot, that's a transitory image.
Yes.
So I am quite interested in the idea that there is no place to land for a long time in the poem. There's always a road sort of take you to the next one. So definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. That yes, the sense of dislocation. And I have to say one other thing about Pittsburgh. Your book has, but I think my favorite line might be where is toward the end of the book, where you refer to Pittsburgh as a city of accidental lesbians. And I have this vision of the city fathers putting up a sign as you drive in, "Welcome to Pittsburgh, the city of accidental lesbians," which actually is I guess maybe my final segue in the conversation part is that lets me turn to Bill again, because Bill, more overtly still in your work, you do write, as you refer to them in the book, the country queers. But obviously, a central theme in your writing is the experience of being, of growing up gay, of growing up queer in that environment, and the obvious tension that creates. And I think the thing that really drew me to your first book that we did together, Two Men Rowing Madly Toward Infinity, and then again in this book, is the way you managed to take that queerness and place it in a bucolic setting. You make it normal, and I love that aspect of your work. So I don't know if you want to comment on that just a little bit today, of just how that plays into how you work with place in your work.
Sure. Well, I think part of it is that I guess I kind of belong to a kind of a bridging generation. I when I was growing up, a little kid in the 70s and early 80s, the world was different. Let's put it that way. When I teach my students now, who are 18 to 21-year-olds, a lot of things that they take for granted in their lives, especially the queer kids, weren't the same for me. There was less ease of self, I guess, because we were still going through a lot of struggles. There was no marriage equality. There were still laws in the books, against two men or two women having a physical relationship. There was a lot that had to be overcome. And it's different now. which I celebrate and I think is wonderful. And I think part of what draws me to write about the ordinariness of it is that it is just another facet of life. It's who I am, but not all of who I am. My life is just as boring as anybody else's. It's like a lot of times we only hear about people's lives when something spectacular happens, like spectacularly bad or good. We kind of are drawn to the traffic accidents kind of thing. And for a lot of us, most of the time, that's just not how life is. It's just a day-to-day movement, ahead. So I think that, that sense of making everything sound ordinary or, even bucolic is consciously something that I do and that I am grateful to be able to do. Because when I started writing, things weren't the way they are now either. And so I had a lot of, difficulties to explore and look at. And it's not that the world has changed all that dramatically, but I think I've witnessed a lot of change in that. Life has gotten better. I mean, the whole It Gets Better campaign. Yeah, it actually does. I mean, not for everybody and not every time, but by and large, yeah, it does get better. Even if that means it sometimes gets a little dull, that's okay. I appreciate it. So yeah, in the sense of place, I don't know what it would be like to go back and live there now. I would not want to try. I'm hoping that life for queer people, for couples, for married people is better, that there's more integration, live and let live kind of attitudes, but I don't know. And I guess I don't ever want to be in the position of having to find out. I could choose to find out, but I don't really want to know. I guess, to be perfectly honest, that was part of my life and it's different now. I prefer living in urban areas, although I love the country and always will. Love the quiet and looked for that a lot. Even in a city, I still look for quiet places because I appreciate the sounds, just the beauty of that, of the small, those little tiny details.
And I like when you talk about, you look for the country in the city. Allison, I think about that in your book, and there's a scene in one of your poems where you're basically gardening on your balcony. You're kind of recreating a little bit of your rural life in the city, and you look for that. But again, I'm struck by how all of you are writing about a place that you are from, but it is a place that you are from. It's not the place you are now. And would you go back to it if you could go back to it? Sam's already talked about how that no longer, seems to be home in the way it was. Bill, the same way. And I know you look back on it very fondly, Allison, from your perspective now. So, anyone have any final thoughts on this part of the conversation? Because I think we ought to hear some more poetry. Bill, I'm going to have you lead us off with this next round of readings, but I'm going to actually ask a craft question. And I think we were talking about this at the very beginning. I can't remember if it was after we officially started the reading or not, but when we were talking about you doing prose poems. And I just want to ask, just from sort of a craft decision, I was struck because so many of your poems, you are kind of talking about stricture, you're talking about the inside and the out, and there's something about that solid block of text on the page that to me accentuates that it has boundaries that poems typically don't have on the page. Was that a conscious decision on your part in terms of how you shaped this work in deciding to make them prose poems?
Yeah, for this particular book, very, very much so. I went into it knowing it would be prose poetry. And I was thinking of things like Spoon River Anthology, in even some Carl Sandburg stories about small town life and that kind of thing. And I knew there's both a freedom to it because it allows me not to stop and think about things like line breaks or white space. So I like both the stricture and the freedom of those blocks. I know what I'm working with. It allows me to feel a little more free to make things very more narratively driven than I might be comfortable doing if I were, working in the way I usually work. And it's not that, my last book, a lot of my stuff is narratively driven. But this, I guess, is my way of acknowledging that sometimes I don't know the difference between one and the other. And like with these pieces, they really waffle for me. I've always had sections of prose poetry in my books, or prose poems scattered throughout the books. And it's a form I feel very drawn to and comfortable with because it is the lack of complete definition around it. I feel like it's okay to explore because there aren't exactly clear definitions. Nobody's kind of put their stamp on it and said this, like with a fixed form, this is the way it is. And I love fixed forms. That's another kind of challenge. But yeah.
All right. Read us some more of these wonderful prose poems.
Okay. Well, why don't I'll read Country Queers since we've mentioned that. The subtitle, or the parenthetical title is Long Ago. There were many who never married, those out hiding in the cornfields, those out walking in the trees. There were many who said they hadn't met the right one yet, who lived with their mothers until their mothers died. Many who lived then, having run out of excuses. There were bachelor farmers born out of a long tradition of men who lived for their land. There were women who cleaned the church pews, those who cooked for the priest, those so devout they might as well have been nuns. There were the brothers who were not brothers, sisters who were not sisters, those who didn't socialize, those who wouldn't mix, those who never opened their mouths, those who married silence. There were those who did marry and those who had children, those who crept from family bed and found what they needed at wayside rests, those who never married but had one roommate for life. There were those who cut themselves off from family, those whose families cut them off. There were those who disappeared, suitcase in hand, those who disappeared but took nothing with them. There were those who chose a quiet death, those who wed the river, those who wed the rope. There were those who waited, there were those who spoke. There were those who lived and thrived. Let's see here. This one is called Seance. If there was a way to talk with you, I don't think I'd use it. Titillating the notion of communicating with another plane, my voice finding your voice in a vague celestial space between one world and another, but frightening. The gift the dead give us, silence. We claim we have things to say, apologies to make. We know it can never be, so we talk big. One evening by myself, I saw a pale white form on the stairs. It was a woman. She seemed utterly alone, not at peace, not in torment, dispossessed of the earth. I was terrified. Better to speculate on the next world. Ghosts taunt us with all we don't know. So stay quiet, my dear, please. Let me forget the shape of your face. Allow me to lose through time and attrition your voice's timbre. Let's see here. This one is called Poor. The shuttered bar's wall collapses, falls into the laundromat. Dirty clothes for days and nowhere to wash, the oversized blankets, the heavy quilts stitched from remnants of grandmother's dresses. Winter is coming, so they get out the lath and heavy plastic. I knew families who lived like that, broken windows patched with canvas tarps, frozen breath-forming clouds in the unheated kitchen. I knew families who depended on the meat their men would hunt each autumn. No game meant nothing to eat, shamefaced trips to the food shelves. A semblance of strength trumped the cries of a hungry child, and I would see those kids in the school hallways, pale and thin, lacking breakfast and focus. I was one of those kids, could always spot my kind, missing dead fathers, mothers eaten up by poor pay at local factories. Someone might ask, how poor are you? But you could not say, not to teachers, not to friends. Silence equaled strength, the ability to not to deny yourself everything. Those houses are empty now, bankrupt or abandoned, farmsteads unable to support any family. I see them on the way to visit my elderly mother. The animals take over and trees grow up through kitchen floors. Upper bedrooms become aviaries full of birds and owls that eat the birds, with bats sequestered in every corner. See, something for which there is no word. The thin white muslin curtains flutter in an early spring breeze. How odd our language is that we can say cloth moves in the manner of a butterfly's wings. But there is no better word, perhaps in another language. In a Bergman film whose plot I've forgotten, there are moments in between moments, scenes in between scenes. Soft light on a bowl of fruit sitting on a well-worn wooden table. The color of a weathered bench near a stout back door. The evanescent quality of shadows on summer nights that are as bright as day. Here's one, I'll just read it. It's called The Man in the Red Shirt. Here lies a boy who has a dream, the same dream every night, the same dream for over a year. He's just beginning to fall asleep when a cloud coalesces in the pooling moonlight. It resembles the Milky Way, a swirl of bright particles that grows into the shape of a man. Every night, the same dream. The man's hair and beard are black. He wears a blood red shirt and his eyes are too luminous, his skin too white, his face a mask of malice. When the boy tries to move, his muscles are lax. When he tries to scream, his voice has vanished. The man moves slowly toward the bed. The boy is trapped in his body. I'm going to kill you, he hears the man say, though his lips don't move, and he floats more than walks till he stands directly over the boy. He places his hand around the boy's throat and begins to squeeze. The boy sees the stars that shape the man's body, each an orb that has its own face. He blacks out. He tells his family what happened each night, the same dream, and they shrug or laugh or assume it's a lie. Who listens to the dreams of children? Who pays attention to their wild imaginations? Every day must fall into darkness. Every star in the sky must shine. Poor child in the night. The moonlight is merciless. His screams emptied into the dark. Let's see here. It's called In the Shoulder Season. Light rain weaves a damp net over my body, a clinging shawl. Fog is born in the collision between one season and another, and it has the power to render me invisible. I walk between thin and thin pockets of it, appearing only from streetlight to streetlight, now here, now gone. The rain is so fine tonight that I cannot call it rain. Instead, misty silk organza, God's wet breath. How am I doing for time? Okay.
We're good. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. Plenty.
Unexplained death. Sunlight filtered through a liquid lens ripples as it reaches toward the lake's bottom. In winter, it cannot reach the lake's silt floor. He was in the truck when they found him, his eyes open as if looking out through the water, searching for every other lost thing that rested where he rested. Not a heart attack, the official said, not alcohol or drugs, no medical condition. No one will say suicide in a small town. It could cause decades of talk, and his family wanted him buried in the Catholic cemetery next to his son, who died of AIDS, though they called it cancer over 20 years before. He was simply dead. Having lived his whole life in that place, he knew where the aeration system sat at the bottom of the lake. The system's pump kept ice from sealing the water's surface in winter so the fish wouldn't suffocate. That's where the police found him a few days after he went missing, his body gently rocking in the icy water. You can read the poem that the title comes from. It's called In Dreams. The darkness is pitiless. I can't sleep through the night, so spend hours in a perpetual twilight, as in those towns in the far north where, in winter, it's never daylight, only a slow arc between dusk and darkness. Sleep comes fitfully from my body's primordial fear that, in too long a rest, my soul might take flight and never find its way home. The ancient Egyptians called this the Ka, the soul that nightly left the body asleep and soared out across the sky. In the final dream I had about my sister, I was sitting in the kitchen of our childhood home. The phone rang. I answered. It was her. She was calling from beyond. It was a poor connection. Her voice was almost unintelligible amidst crackling static and the cries of desperate others who also wanted contact. It was a short conversation. She wanted to say goodbye because they wouldn't allow her to call again. Who are they? Who are they ever? I desperately wanted to ask, but her voice faded out. The line went dead. I cried for days. This was long ago. Nothing so vivid as supplanted that dream. Some mornings I wake to tears but can't recall their cause, only a vague sense of something someone lost. A hurt the merciless world will visit upon all of us in turn. It's common, though most don't speak of it, how walls built in the waking hours can fall in an instant of fluttering hands, all of those delicate barricades downed. Maybe that's a good place to stop.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. And I do love that image, and that's the title of your book, Our Delicate Barricades Downed. And I want to mention that since you brought it up, that this book is so new that you don't have it. The good news is we have put the link up for you for folks to order the book, and the book is arriving this week from the printer. So you, Bill, will have copies soon, and all the rest of you in the room who've been enjoying Bill's poetry, you don't have to wait to get it. We'll be shipping copies out this week. So thanks very much for sharing your work today. Let's see. I think we decided that Allison would go next. So let's hear some more poetry.
Okay. I thought it was interesting that Bill spoke about looking for a quiet place in the middle of the city. After 4 decades of silence and quiet in the country, I love the noise of the city. It's still new to me, even after all these years. I'm right downtown in Lexington, and right now there's a protest going on across the street. I can hear them shouting. So I love that. Even the sirens, I just like the noise. Another thing that I like about the city is all the coffee houses and the cafes. In Metcalfe County, they had nothing like that. And I think at that point, I'm not even sure I knew what the word latte meant. But Starbucks and I quickly developed a very, very serious relationship that still goes on today. So I'm going to read a poem called Eavesdropping on Poets at the Coffee House. Each week, the faithful, tattoos and yoga pants, thick, dark-rimmed lenses, rainbow hair that veils faces already hard to read, piercings like freckles, voices flinging fuck and vagina and Molly with animated rage. I write lilacs, mourning doves, tomatoes embarrassed on the vine, lace collars and looking both ways at crosswalks. I am no one to them. Could be Anne Bradstreet in my quaintness. I reach for my cup, coffee grown cold, settle quiet in my chair in case a whippoorwill, something common and familiar, chants my name. At the start of the pandemic, when we could still go out a little bit, I was at a liquor store and a poem walked in. So this is called At the Liquor Store. I'm standing in a well-distant line, cuddling my boredom-easing Chardonnay, when I see him walk in. Blue scrubs, mask, bone-weary frame. He grabs some whiskey off the shelf without looking. I try to catch his eye, to thank him for all he's doing, to say I want to hug him, to let him know I pray for him. But he stares straight ahead into a scene I cannot imagine. I hear the checkout girl's cheery greeting, his terse, long shift. As he heads for the door, the downward tilt of his neck, slumped shoulders more apparent from behind, I wonder if he will make it to his car before opening the bottle. And then I'd like to end with prayer for the old things, of which I am one. Blessed be my well-thumbed thesaurus, its missing index of X, Y, and Z, random pages tea-splattered and ink-assaulted. What hours spent on the hunt for the perfect word, like a bloodhound snuffling quarry. Blessed also my middle strainer, handles dearly departed to some scrap heap, dented and waffle-faced apparatus, a lifetime of sieving enough spaghetti to feed all of Italy. Blessings to my alarm clock, secondhand, lying dead on the bottom, like a discarded silver toothpick. Alarm, now just a lover's whisper, nibbling my sleepy ear. And blessed be this spent body, knees like a rusty gate, mind a sputtering choke engine, frayed and graying relic, the ruins of some once great society. May we find value in what we are, not in what we lack. May we, like the sun, wake and give light, flaring our colors wildly before we tuck into darkness. Thank you.
Oh, and thank you so much, Allison. And I think right now that sentiment about being grateful for what we are and what we have and not what we lack is something that this last year has really taught us. But I'm also really glad that you read the coffee house poem, because when you talk about the quaintness of your poetry, I want to say I think that's evidence that we could all use the sort of quaintness that you're writing about, the gentleness of it, and just the rootedness of it. So thank you very much for sharing your work with us today. So now we have Sam DeFlitch to read us out of this portion.
Thanks, Larry, and thank you everybody so much. I'm very happy to read us home, for lack of a better term. So I'll be reading 4 poems that are all from the final section of the book, Ohio. The poem I'll be starting with is a poem that really enjoys pushing time again through people and places, and it takes place in an amusement park in Pittsburgh called Kennywood Park, which is a park that has a lot of good energy, both for the kids and for poems. So, my brother's daughters. I am reading on a bench in Kennywood while my brother's daughters ride the jackrabbit for the 3rd time. Children hurtle past my bench, coated with powdered sugar and face paint, reminding me to listen to the cool warning of an August night. And the jackrabbit, it's not even the best roller coaster in the park, but they are enamored with the everlasting surprise of the second bump, the click-clack of the gears, sending them higher. They will plead to stay late. I've let slip that they can see the city from the Thunderbolt's back after dark. Yes, of course, I am still reading the Yoga Sutras, and the whole park will become something like a deep inner peace after the lights turn on, the lights chasing each other along the spires of the pitfall. The next poem it's a longer poem, and it's a poem that does the work of incorporating a lot of other poems that are already in the book inside of it. It's a poem where the repetition of images and motifs really comes to a head, and it really almost repeats entire poems at places, and so some of the lines might sound quite familiar to you. So the poem is called Come Out All You Moths. Thursday night is garbage night. My trash is old clothes. My old clothes are spilling through my hands. My hands are a box full of flies. The flies are taking off with my hair. Look, I am bald. I am my mother's truck engine. I am the space, the deer, left sleeping in the ferns. I am 7:52 in the evening. Babushka, come find me. Babushka, the dog is old and John is not. And also, I left pumpkins rotting outside and only their caved-in shells are left and the gap in the screen door. At night, I soak my sheets. At night, John with the bullet. I am the dog's shaking legs. Come out, all you moths. I am all the days that the sky has broken clear, cold in the west. I am spilling oranges across the dawn line, spilling wild blackbirds pouring themselves over a horizon. I am the Ohio line. I am West Side Road after all tourists have left for the day. I am laying my body down on the asphalt. See, I am pumpkins, and the dog has taken up her howling. Babushka, what does it mean to grow old? It is late November. The shade is grazing the tops of the pines, and soon it will be purple, dark. I am peeling myself out of bed. I am driving the car. I am driving the car. I am the car. I am late to pick up the children. Somewhere John is putting the bullet in his head. This sort of thing happens. To grow old really means nothing because I am growing old and the dog is growing old and my parents are growing old and John is not. Why? Because he didn't want to. After all, who really wants to carry the dog into the yard on a January night because she can't walk anymore? Because that's the sort of thing you have to do when you get old, and someday you'll be the dog too. Anyway, I speed up. I am late to pick up the children, and I promised I would not be late. And then gonna end on the poem To Lead a Pig Skyward, which is the last poem of the book. And I don't want to brag too much, but Charles Simic, who I had the joy to study with, called this the best poem ever written about pigs. So high praise indeed. This is also my mom's favorite poem, so I'm very happy to be able to read it for her here. To Lead a Pig Skyward. I read A Pig Can't Look Up, that you've got to gently tilt their heads back if they're going to take in the night skies. I never led a pig skyward late at night in Pennsylvania. Earthbound is probably better. We all start getting ideas when we look up, and the pigs, they always seemed so pleased where they were, rooting in soft earth. No need to look up for God when the holy was there, beneath their trotters, cool below the autumn archer that was rising lightly on the eastern horizon. So I will end with that. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm glad you ended with the pig poem because it's a wonderful poem. But I'm also really glad you read the longer poem because I talked with Bill a little bit earlier about his craft decision in terms of the structure of his prose poems. And I just want to point out for people who perhaps haven't read your book yet, that one of the really interesting things that I think you do is this repetition of imagery. There's the folding chair that turns up frequently. There's the old dog. There's all of these things. And then, as you say, sometimes entire poems reappear. And I am struck by a book that takes its title and its form from the merging of waters, the way that there is that sense of the swirl and flow and eddies and backwaters and all in the form of your poems. So I really congratulate you just structurally on how you've put those poems together and put this book together. So let me change my view here so that I can see everyone who's left. We have a few minutes. Oh, I do want to say one thing about Sam's book. Hopefully those of you who don't have it already will want to add it to your library, which means I need to tell you that we have sold out of the first printing of her book. So what a wonderful thing particularly for a debut collection. But we have plenty more on the way. So don't be shy, just be a little patient. If you order Sam's book, we'll be getting more copies in, certainly by the end of this month. So we'll be able to fill your orders very soon. As I say, we have just a few minutes. If there's anyone that has a question or a comment. We've had some wonderful chat. Thanks for everybody who has commented. I encourage all the poets who haven't already had a look at the chat today. We've had a lot of nice compliments on your work. But if there's anyone who would like to ask anything right now, we'll take just a minute or two for that, and we'll just let you unmute yourself and speak up if there's anyone.
Hello, Larry.
Hey, Mervyn.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. You're still on Trinidad, aren't you?
That's where I am.
All right. I'm trying not to hate you a little bit for that.
Please don't.
Okay.
I just wanted to say a word about this idea of place and moving. That people who live in America, there's an advantage, right? That even if you move from your home state, the state where you were born, even if you move all the way across the country, there is a sense of still being in America and still home, you know, even though it's as different as Alaska is to New Mexico, say, there's still a sense of being in that place that you belong to. I think somebody who moves from a separate place altogether, like from Trinidad, for example, it's a different experience, I think, you know, it's a whole different experience. But there's a joy in being able to, for one American to meet another and say, oh, you're from Texas? Oh, I'm from Louisiana, you know, and there's a kind of belonging, even when there isn't, and that's the contradiction.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And I like in your work where, particularly in your Corona poems, you talk about New York and you talk about Trinidad both, and you're distanced from both of those because of the pandemic, because of not being able to connect to place. And I think maybe this year has made us appreciate place more than ever, because I was saying to one of my friends in New York a few months ago that how much I miss New York, and he said, well, you know, and he's in Brooklyn. He said, yeah, I do too, because he couldn't get out. And Susanna, I know, I think I forget how many consecutive weeks you spent in your apartment, but it was certainly
4 months.
Four, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, great to see you here today, Mervyn. It's really nice to connect with you again.
And I wanted to thank all three poets, you know, especially in that second part of the evening. They sort of hit a stride in that second part. I mean, maybe because of your conversation, Larry, with them, but they just got running in that second part, and it was just it was amazing, just amazing. Yeah.
All right. I agree, and thanks for that comment. Last call. Anyone have anything they want to add or ask of our readers? All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you one more time.
Hey, Larry, I think we have a question in the chat.
Okay, thank you for catching that. Okay.
Even it's a Sam, your poem about having to pick up the kids and not being late. And a bullet to the head. These things happen. So beautiful. It reminds me of Joanne Beard's essay, Fourth State of Matter. And I wondered what influences the poets leaned into with the
I was going to say, I think Stephanie is frozen on us there. The last part of that question is, I wondered what influences the poets leaned into with their poem. So Sam, you want to speak to that immediately since it was directed to you?
Sure, absolutely. I think it really depends on the poem for me. I think, for example, a lot of the poems where there's quite a bit of movement were influenced, well, a large influence was, the work of someone like Elizabeth Bishop, who's just, a master of movement in space and across space. But at this time I was working with Charlie Simic. So I think these poems of place have a lot of him in it. Winter and starkness, and also some humor in the light of everything that's happening. So I think, right off the top of my head, those are a few poets who come to mind. I think largely I'm really interested in the work, and I still am from when I started reading poetry, of Yehuda Amichai, this idea of where's the holy inside of the not. So I think that is a lot of just broadly sort of philosophically an interest and sort of influence in my work as well.
Do either of our other readers want to speak to influence? I know Allison, you've alluded to Wendell Berry in your work, which proves that Kentucky is your adopted state now, because you always have to address Wendell. But I don't know if there's anyone else that you particularly have been inspired by in this work.
Well, all Kentucky writers. I had never read anybody from Kentucky, so when I moved here, Morris Bookstore, I went crazy getting books from Kentucky poets. Wendell Berry, sure, Jim Wayne Miller, Albert Stewart. They all were a big influence to me, and I'd never heard the concept of place. So I was really immersed in it. When you read any Kentucky writer, place is such a strong part of what they write. So I'm still being influenced, so.
Yeah. Bill, anyone you have a shout out to that you would particularly want to note that relates to your work or has inspired your work?
Yeah, I guess the poets and the prose writers I've been reading while I was working on the manuscript. So a lot of B.H. Fairchild, Philip Levine, Louise Gluck, Jack Gilbert. I love his work. Frank Bidhart. And I'm looking at my bookshelf here. Jose Saramago, I kind of went on a kick with him. Plus, I got kind of overly fascinated by ghost stories, strangely enough.
Yeah.
So I ended up reading a lot of Japanese ghost stories, like ghost stories from different parts of the world, to get a sense of how different cultures thought about hauntedness and haunting. So, yeah.
And I think that's a great place to end on in a reading where we've talked about poetry of place, and to Bill's comment, and especially to Allison talking about coming to Kentucky and learning about place through the writers. So today you've heard from three wonderful writers: Allison Thorpe, Samantha DeFlitch, William Reichard, and we all know a lot more about their places from their work. And from this, we can learn that this is how poetry can be our entree into the world and into discovering places. So thanks to our readers today for sharing your wonderful words with us. And thanks to our very large audience, including the 28 people who stayed with us here till the end. So we had a really good turnout today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Yeah, you can clap quietly. I've discovered if I ask people to unmute, it becomes chaotic, but you can all express your appreciation for the readers. And I will say, if you enjoyed what you heard today, we do monthly Zoom events, and we're going to continue to do those even after the world begins to open back up. We don't have our readers and our date set quite yet for April, so Please, if you haven't done so already, friend us on Facebook. Broadstone Books on Facebook is a great place to see what we're up to in terms of our coming events. So I do know in April we will have some more new authors with new books, and they will be announced very shortly. So to everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you in the Zoom room again soon.